but for me, I think it is having a personal belief system that I'm in charge of my life. I'm in charge of what I do and work. I have a responsibility inside the organization that I may be employed by to deliver the kind of value that only I can because of my gifts and talents, and see a vision for that and make personal commitments and promises to myself and to my leadership about the role I'll play in that. And obviously a lot of that takes doing things. It's taking action, etc. The other side of entrepreneurship, I think, is being willing to take risk around it. You know, that's the reason that most people in their mind probably say, I could never be an entrepreneur because it's too risky. Well, I think we could change our mindset and say it's too risky not to do that.
Perhaps today's discussion is an invitation for you to do what a company called AIG did in an ad they ran years ago that always impressed me, where they had a theme that said, the greatest risk in life is not taking. So take the risk on you. Take the risk on who you could be. Do not end up being George Colleen at the end of your life, wondering if it mattered you lived and whether you blew it. Take the risk, and the way you do it is through entrepreneurship. In your marriage, in your relationship, in your friendships, in your job, in your health, in your spirit walk. Take the chance to be creative, be ambitious, be driven, and be willing to learn. And the only thing you will sacrifice is your fear and the small prison that we put ourselves in. Because ironically, we die slow, quiet deaths through the mediocrity of not taking a chance.
Hello, Al. How are you this morning?
I'm good, Stacey. How are you, brother?
I'm good, but you know the funny thing is, I didn't really want to ask you that question. I wanted to demonstrate it to people that even close brothers in life who have great understanding of depth with one another, we still do this casual greeting. And I was thinking about the quality of my life, and I realized that my relationships with my most meaningful colleagues, friends, family are where I get the highest quality of my life. And instead of asking you, how are you this morning, which I've already done, I wanted to ask you a different question. What has been occupying your mind so far this morning? Because you can't just give me a one-word answer, I'm good, how are you? What's been occupying your mind this morning, Hal, as we enter this episode of Fourth Level Conversations?
Great question. Well, globally, environmentally, what's occupied my mind is frankly what occupies it every morning I wake up, which is the surprise that I'm back in this dimension. Literally, it's because I leave dream world and I come in, oh, here I am again. It's time to put on my costume. It's time to put on my suit of clothes and go through the routine of showering and do all the stuff. And what do I got on the calendar? Oh, I got Stacey in the podcast, So globally, I do that. Specifically, I enter into every morning trying to soften and quiet my active mind enough to feel what it is that's the subtle state that God is suggesting to me to approach the day with. And then I normally put those thoughts down on my Facebook post for our Level 4 tribe that just kind of come to me through me as an articulation of the state that I'm experiencing. And this morning's happened to be about intentionality, compassion, and love. But then I start thinking about the first thing we're going to do today, which is, I'm going to get to talk to Brother Stacey. We get to do a podcast that maybe nobody ever watches. I hope they do. And if they ever do watch it, I don't know that we would know. I certainly never get any feedback. It would be nice if we did, just so we know that we're not shouting into the canyon. But what if we are shouting into the canyon? Well, maybe it isn't so much about who is bothering to watch these or enjoys them or likes them, hates them, whatever. It isn't about the thumbs ups. It's about the state that you and I have to be in to try to provide this offering even if it means we are shouting into the void, because in the end, what we're doing is we are choosing to enter into a state, a shared state that we're sharing with our audience of the possibilities of our minds and where they can lead us toward the light or toward the dark. And in that spirit, what came to me that I felt, and I texted you last night to ask you if you were good with it, was to perhaps make today's podcast about entrepreneurship, being an entrepreneur, and to not limit that to self-employed people, but have it be more of a state of mind for a housewife or an employee somewhere, or a leader, or the guy standing on the corner with a sign. So I'm putting on the table out of my morning and its heart that you and I discussed this topic of entrepreneurship from a level 4 perspective of what is it, why does it matter, and why might it be in the interest of our audience to consider mindfully adopting more of an entrepreneurial mindset in their relationship with their life, not just professionally, but even personally. So what's your thoughts about all that?
Yeah, I think it's a great subject because I think when we move to an entrepreneurial mindset, there are a couple things that are required and opportunities that come with it. The first one is you now have greater opportunity for experiences and growth in your life because it's now, I'm going to pursue what I believe is most important for me in my life and where I spend my time. And second, a greater degree of accountability, personal accountability, because now it is all about I own it. I own the opportunities and I own the responsibility of the behaviors, the mindset, and the actions that I take to do that. And I think so often people, we were just talking about my background when I was growing up, my parents, my dad, my stepmom, my dad served in the same job, same company for 38 years. My stepmother, same thing for 28 years. And my longest stretch was 24 years. And I loved it. So it's not anything that I should say, but I think during that time I had to adopt some mindset around entrepreneurship. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have been able to stay that long because I am a pretty driven person and I'm a pretty confident person. And I definitely want to see people have a positive impact from their interaction with my life. And so I think we can talk about that. So some of the people watching out, and I believe that some people are and more will, some are actual owners and they're the leaders of their organization. And so by definition, we would call them the entrepreneur of that organization. And there are leaders and there are staff and there are employees. And I think both of us would agree that the most thriving organizations, irrespective of market conditions and so forth, are those who have a team of people that feel a degree of entrepreneurial ownership and responsibility. And they can't have that unless they're tied into a shared vision, obviously, because they could get in contrasting directions with the leader if they didn't have that. And I was looking at some statistics this week about employee job satisfaction, and I think it's interesting that it depends on industry. It sometimes depends on whether you're working remotely or you're working in an office and what's important to people. But it's clear that over half of all employees in America are dissatisfied with their job and their career. I think in some industries it may be much higher than that because of market conditions and what the market has experienced. But the number one thing that researchers, and this mostly is from the Pew Research, PEW, and most of their research is saying that the major reason that people are dissatisfied is the lack of communication and direction from their supervisor or their manager. And so how we bleed back into this conversation of entrepreneurship, I think could help people understand how they could have better outcomes from that.
Yeah, beautiful. So if we were to break this down into perhaps some segments in our time here of what is it? What is entrepreneurship, an entrepreneurial mind? who should try to be it, and why should they try to be it, and why should companies, one of the premises of our program is that when I put this together was sort of a checklist of what you want as a CEO of a company, what you want as a leader of a company. And one of the components is you want entrepreneurs, not employees. You want your employees thinking like entrepreneurs, not like employees. And we'll talk about what the difference in mindset is and why, which is rare. And I think a lot of it has to do with people's personal belief of whether I can even be an entrepreneur because of what they think an entrepreneur is. So let's start with that. What are the qualities of being an entrepreneur?
Well, I think obviously there's some definitions that people can go research that'll have more clarity around the term entrepreneurship. But for me, I think it is having a personal belief system that I'm in charge of my life, I'm in charge of what I do in work. I have a responsibility inside the organization that I may be employed by to deliver the kind of value that only I can because of my gifts and talents, and see a vision for that and make personal commitments and promises to myself and to my leadership about the role I'll play in that. And obviously a lot of that takes doing things, it's taking action, etc. The other side of entrepreneurship, I think, is being willing to take risk around it. That's the reason that most people in their mind probably say, I could never be an entrepreneur because it's too risky. Well, I think we could change our mindset and say it's too risky not to do that. Because whether we put our capital in place to start a company or run a company, that's a different question. But if we have the mindset of, listen, I'm self-employed, I'm a contractor, even though I'm W-2 employee for this company, I'm the boss of me, I'm the president and CEO of my life and of my responsibilities to this organization. Now, I have worked with some entrepreneurs in the leadership role or the ownership role that really have shied away from wanting their groups to think that way, because here's what I've heard. Al, you probably heard this too. Gosh, if I have everybody thinking they're the self-employed president inside of my company, all of a sudden I'm going to have 500 people in my boardroom and I'm not going to be able to do what I want to with this company. And that's a limiting leadership position of why a lot of companies don't get that mindset throughout their organization. And obviously it's all fear-based or without thinking through how could you have people have that mindset and still manage the efficiency of your vision and your direction and your decision making. There are lots of examples of companies who have done that, and they thrive regardless of market conditions.
Yeah, and there are people that I've known personally and people that I know of that really make a compelling case to the exact opposite of that perspective that you put on the table correctly, I think, as to what the typical mindset is. I know because I had it. I was an employee until I was, when did I start my mortgage company? 38 years old. I thought my job was going to be just working for others and trying not to get fired, and so I could get the every 2-week biscuit of give me the paycheck so I can pay the mortgage and make it through life. It's a defensive survival strategy to be an employee in my mind, and it belies the lack of personal either awareness, vision, or security, or belief, trust, or relationship with risk that allows for growth. And then I started a mortgage company in 1990 with a buddy, and that grew, and we sold it. And then I've been doing this for 24 years. And so I've really been self-employed for 35 years, which is the majority of my adult life that I never thought I would be because I never self-defined as that. And so I wonder why that happened. And the difference it made was exponential in all areas, confidence, economics, all of it. So your point about why a lot of leaders are leery of having entrepreneurs as employees, I think was beautifully addressed by Jack Stack in the book called The Great Game of Business. And I wasn't aware of that book until a friend of mine came to me and went through my program, who had a company that he created called Ownership Thinking. His name was Brad Hams. And Brad he licensed the material from Jack Stack. He had been the president of Mrs. Fields Cookies in Mexico City. He's American. He's run Mrs. Fields in Mexico City. And he read this book and he flew to Pennsylvania, wherever Stack was, and said, I want to buy the rights to this term ownership thinking. Because the whole premise of the great game of business is most leaders are doing it exactly wrong. They distrust their employees and they treat them as though they're chattel, like they're just cogs in an economic machine. And now this bridges over to Peter Senge's work at MIT, Sloan Business School at MIT, that if you treat employees impersonally as just cogs in an economic machine, they will treat the company that way, and you're at risk of the very thing you're talking about, Stacey. I'm going to look for the next paycheck and all that. Senge's work around leadership and teams and visions and all that, then going over to Stack's work that went to Brad Ham's work, is that you need to do the exact opposite. Your job as a leader, as a CEO, is to have the damn courage to bring out the best in your employees personally and professionally. And while now and then that will lead them away from you, far more often it's going to lead them towards you. Because how many people have you ever worked for that took that kind of interest in you? What people working in companies really value isn't just, am I getting paid? They think that's all they're there for. Your opportunity as a leader is to surprise them in having them experience you and the culture you create around you as a place that imbues them with a new relationship with themselves, to take risks, to be creative, to be ambitious, to have a vision, to be driven, to be disciplined, to be responsible, and to do it on behalf of the shared vision and mission of the company. That's what a really enlightened level 4 culture does. Is it's a company full of entrepreneurs. Look at Steve Jobs. So you got Jobs and Wozniak, a couple of guys working in a garage somewhere, and then they get this vision. Jobs gets this vision. I want to have computers not be something that are just in a clean room for IBM that's the size of a bus where you can't afford it. I want everybody to have it on their kitchen counter like a toaster. And they started with that vision of having an insanely great technology that was ubiquitously available to everybody at a point they could afford, that was a world that was integrated, as opposed to this Frankensteinian world of the PC world where you have to get this printer from here and all that. And so look at what they created out of that. Apple computer, right? Entrepreneurship is taking the chance that you are more than your fears. Entrepreneurship is taking the chance that you are more than the function you can serve on behalf of somebody else's value proposition. You can be in that value proposition, but your worth within it, and therefore your long-term compensation and even access to power and opportunity, is going to be directly related with your ability to be bold, creative, appropriately risk-taking on behalf of growing things, even if it's for the organization you work with, that you may just end up taking over, or at least learning enough to go and start your own gig. So entrepreneurship is really more than just going out and starting a business. It's really a mindset of allowing yourself a relationship of not being limited by your past in your future, and to take a chance that you are more than your story of your failures and your fears in the past. By nature, I am a very risk-averse person, and what had me create a mortgage company for 10 years and then this thing for 24 is a vision that was bigger, that awakened a larger place of passion and inspiration for me than those fears of the dark stories I told you. What if it doesn't? What if it doesn't work? You, Stacey, to me, and I was just telling this for this video, are a wonderful example of this principle, because you're a guy that spent a long career working for other people, high levels, high income, high power, high notoriety. And when you've realized, not telling your secrets, but when you realized that your passion was being lost for that activity, and you were probably realizing you were just playing it out, doing it for the paycheck, I think God created circumstances in your life that had you displaced by design to give you an opportunity to reconsider who you are. And here you are today at 58 or 60 or however old you are, and you get a chance to say, you know what, I'm not done yet. Maybe it took this long for me to finally decide that I'm worth taking a chance on, in the form of letting go of my fears in favor of my passions, of what I could create with IMP and Al, and in Hourglass on my own, and with Nicole, my assistant, and with the people in my life. And when you do that, I've found that you get tailwinds. It's like God fills your sails. I have in my story of my level 3 ego self, is I don't deserve the life I have today. I don't deserve 3 houses and net worth. I don't deserve your friendship, much less 50 of my dearest friends that are my clients, and the future friends that I don't know yet that are going to come to me. So I don't believe that I'm practicing my entrepreneurship. I think its great awakening was when I began to operate out of a personified principle of greater than what about me and what about my fears. And when I did that, God quietly blew like a breath of wind in my sails and had my life take off. So it doesn't mean you can't work somewhere and be an employee. It doesn't mean you can't be a housewife with 3 kids screaming and your husband's off to work, or a house husband while your wife's off to work. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It's really who you are while you're doing it that determines whether you are growing your entrepreneurship and with it the possibility of your life, or you are limiting it by an employee mindedness or a role mindedness or a safety mindedness that's having you stay warm, safe, and dry in the bunker of frailty, insecurity, and doubt. What are your thoughts, brother?
Yeah. I was thinking about, why do employees not take a more aggressive stance towards their own entrepreneurship? And some thoughts came to mind. One, it's that same thing we've been talking about in past podcasts and episodes, Al, is that it's warm, safe, and dry to just go to work, do the job I'm expected to from a compliance standpoint, and go home and not worry about the health of the organization other than, can I still keep my job? So that's one reason, is our level 3 minds kind of go there. The second is there's a fear that if I really do want to do this and I push forward my ideas and desires for the organization, I'll be seen as aggressive and high maintenance, a troublemaker. So I think there's reasons that people do that, and I do think also the great robber of quality of life of just indifference, right? Been doing it this way forever. I'm fine. I'm getting by. I don't need more, in the sense of my experiences and the growth of my inner abilities. On the other side, the owners, the leaders, we've talked a little bit about why they may not want to expand that mindset throughout their organization, but I've seen some mistakes from leaders that even do want to do that. So I think if you're a CEO or leader listening to this, one of the worst things that you could say to your leadership team or employees when there's some adversity or there's some conflict around an issue is, this is my company. You want to kill culture. You want to kill commitment, heart to your mission. Trust me, I've been through it. It happens. And it's not that a leader can't recover from that, but just be aware that if those words come out of your mouth, you have just destroyed months, if not years, of culture building that you have done. And the second thing is if you're going to trust your leaders to help advance the organization in whatever mission you're on, and you give them the opportunity to do that, but an hour later you're in there doing the task that you've just delegated to them, you're teaching them that you don't trust them. And so let them fall flat on their face. I've been a lot of people listening may be fans of John Maxwell, who's been a leadership trainer, and I had a chance to play golf with him a couple of times in the past. And one of the things he told me, he said, Stacey, here's one of the greatest leadership lessons I learned, is that if someone can do something in a leadership role or a task-oriented role at least 85% as well as I could, let them do it. Even if they fail from time to time, let them do it. I thought that was great advice. And that's not an excuse to not do what you need to as a leader and say everybody else can do all the work. Let's roll up our sleeves still. But I do think as leaders, we have to be thinking about my job as a CEO. I get it's to look forward and see vision and get direction to the organization, have the right kind of relationships that fuel the economic viability of the organization. But our real job is to develop the people that work with us. It really is. And so helping them become better and better at what they do in their ownership mindset of entrepreneurship inside of our organization. I mean, you can go to any great sports team that has had history of success, and the assistant coaches oftentimes go off and they get other jobs, and then the fans are all mad that the assistant left and went to coach for a competitor. It's the greatest compliment to the head coach in the organization they could possibly have, because they created an entrepreneurial mindset and they developed people's skills and abilities and belief in themselves that they could go do great things beyond working under me.
Beautiful. Well, you've sparked a message I would like to share with every CEO, president, or organizational leader, or even a leader of a domain within an organization, of what I've learned in my 24,000 hours of coaching successful people. Sadly, the overwhelming percentage of people with authority in organizations that may be in a role they automatically synonymously think makes them a leader. I'm the CEO, I'm the president, I'm the regional division. The vast majority of those people are not leaders. They're managers.
Right.
They're just functioning to execute a role. And there's a difference, and this is in our program, Stacey, there's a difference between your leadership skills, your management skills, and your coaching skills. If you Google leadership, it's going to take you to a lot of management sites. One of the big problems in today's business world is that people don't differentiate these skills. And to me, they're three legs of a stool, and you got to know what each one is, and you got to know when to practice them effectively. So that's premise one, is that most people who think they're leaders aren't. They're managers, because they don't know what leadership is. They don't know how it's different from management. And so point two is your job as the head of any department, much less a company, is to provide leadership when it's appropriate. That is a skill set well, we've talked about what leadership is, but why it's important for you to be a leader when you are a CEO or president or whatever, is that who you are is reflected into the culture. The culture is the environment the employees work within that give them a certain perspective and approach to how they approach clients and customers. And it reflects the value proposition to the customers. It comes through. Go to a Chick-fil-A, whatever you think of Chick-fil-A, but go to a Chick-fil-A and see the presentation that's consistent from the employees. Whether they mean it or not, it's very respectful, and it's got a certain approach to it. Go to a Starbucks. Hey, what can I start for you today? Drives me nuts, but it's everywhere you go to a Starbucks. It's how they're trained, right? And they're really just sort of mimicking what they were scripted to do. So my first message is, if you think you're a leader, are you? Maybe it's time to have a conversation to see what the difference between a leader and manager, and whether you're really fulfilling your ultimate opportunity, which is to craft the cultural environment through true leadership that creates the inspiration and passion to have people lose their self-protective mechanism that has them always looking through the metaphorical yellow pages and white pages to see who else might hire me at a better price. So that's the message for leaders. For employees, let me offer this premise, that operating in the illusion that being an employee, keeping your head down and just functioning, isn't your greatest security, it's your greatest risk. Because having run companies, been a CEO 3, you've run companies, Stacey. Who is it that gets fired when the tough times hit? The employees that are simply functionaries doing their job, executing what they were told to. Who is it that gets retained? The people that have more value to the company. The company needs them more than they need the company. And those are the entrepreneurs. Those are the creators. Those are the people saying, I know what you want me to do in my job, and I will do it, but I had some thoughts about how to make it better. Have you ever considered allowing me to do this or do that to make it better, more efficient, more profits, etc.? You actually create greater job security by taking the risk of your entrepreneurship in being a generative, creative source of making things better. And it will seem counterintuitive, like you're taking a risk, but employees become nameless, really impersonal, and they become individuals that's much easier to fire, because all you see them as is the role that right now I can't afford. I'm going to job share and get rid of them, and I'll rehire, because the person, and Nancy's nice, but she isn't really, she'll find another job. You fire them. So your greatest risk is actually what you think is your greatest protection, which is your safety in being an employee. You're undifferentiated, and therefore you're no more valuable than the job you execute. Whereas if you bring entrepreneurship to the party and you take the risk of that, and you provide at least suggestions and desires to do things better, you may have an insecure leader that gets threatened by that and says, you're trying to be too much, get out. You don't want to work for that person anyway.
Sure.
You want to work for the person that is who Stacey's talking about, that's saying, show me who you could be and let me help you become that. You want to work for the person that is willing to endorse you taking a risk on your own and on the company's behalf out of a larger creative view. Then you're capturing the mindset of every employee's unique creativity as an individual human being of what they can bring to the party, rather than just cogs in an economic machine that are functioning out of what the past patterns of behavior and process have been. Therefore, entrepreneurship is what differentiates your value proposition as an individual, and therefore gives it, particularly in an age where everything's becoming depersonalized, it really gives you differentiatable value, which is the very foundation. Whether you go create a company, whether you work at your job for the next 30 years, those are the two messages I'd send, one to the top of the house and one to the rank and file, is you're both, said with respect, probably approaching your job from the wrong mindset to what would be optimal for you long term. What are your thoughts, Stacey?
Yeah, and we've got a minute or two to wrap up, but I was thinking about in either of those cases, if you're the employee and you desire to have more of an entrepreneurial mindset and so forth, the first thing to commit yourself to is be a learner. The more knowledge you acquire for yourself, particularly about the industry you might be in, the more valuable your drive towards entrepreneurship will matter to somebody.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid. Al laid it out perfectly. There's far greater risk of not doing it. Here's maybe the greatest risk. You don't do it. And you get to the end of, and maybe you stay in the same job for 40 years and you get to the end and you look back and you wonder if anybody will ever remember you and did it ever matter. That's the greatest risk I think any of us could have, is that we could spend a lifetime doing something. We all need to make a living. I get that. But at the end, get back and say, nobody's going to remember a thing I ever did. And that would be a sad thing. So go for it. And I would also say to people that are in those roles, you actually can do it. It doesn't matter what your education level is. It doesn't matter how many different industries you've been in. You have it inside of you. You literally do. And as if you're the owner and someone approaches you, your job is to come alongside them and support that. Now, of course, you get to shape the direction of that entrepreneurial ship inside your organization. You do take the capital risk of doing that. So you do get that right. But there's a way to do that that's supportive to that person. And it doesn't, I guess, put the fire in their soul out. Don't do that. Let's flame that with the right kind of fuel in the right direction. And you'll be amazed at what will happen for your organization, and amazed what you will feel like as the true entrepreneur at the head of the boat, or the head of whatever you want to call it, the organization. So Al, I think this has been maybe one of our more important discussions because it impacts so many people, and maybe it will help people to change their mindset of what's possible in their life and what gratification, if you're at the top of the class, you can have in helping people lift up to where you are perhaps. And if you develop somebody so well that they go off and do their own thing, oh, what the greatest compliment you could ever have.
Yeah. I want to close. That's brilliant, Stacey. And I want to close with a very personal story of after my mother died when she was 76. My dad lived, he was 7 years older than her, and he lived another 12 years alone. So after she died, here's a guy who'd been married for 55 years to her, and now he's 85 and he's alone. And we were driving down I-25 in Denver, Colorado one morning. And I said, Dad, if you could look at your life like a movie, and you could, how happy are you with your life? He said, he thinks for a minute. He says, I think I blew it. I said, what do you mean? He said, I spent 40 years in the government being warm, safe, and dry for the paycheck out of security, because I was scripted into that out of being in an orphanage from age 5 to 18 and then going into the Great Depression. And my whole life was all about just trying to not die. And as a result, I chose a job that I thought would give me security so I wouldn't die. And it was sad to hear, Stace. And so I said, well, all right, Dad, so let's just roll the movie back to a point in time where you could have made a different choice. what would you have been if you would have spent your life doing something different? Because it's frankly heartbreaking to hear your dad say, I blew my life. I wasted my life. He said, I would have been either an artist or an auto mechanic. Huh. Why is that, Dad? He said, well, first, artist, I took that up after I retired, and I realized I really like to kind of draw pictures. And so, I copy them, I overlay them and copy them, but I've gotten better at it, and I really enjoy that. It does something for me. As far as the auto mechanic thing, when I was about to take the job in the government, I walked into a friend's garage in 1933. And he threw me a carburetor and said, take that apart and clean it and put it back together. So I did. I didn't know what I was doing. I took it apart, tried to keep track of it. I'll clean it, put it all back together. There's still like a spring missing, but I don't know where that goes. But he put it in the car and it worked. And it was so thrilling to realize that I did this. And that conversation always stuck with me with my dad from so long ago, because I realized we're all my dad. We can all get to the end of my life and feel like, okay, I made it through. Whew, I was warm, safe, and dry. I wonder who it is I could have been. That's not a question you ever want to feel. So please take today's podcast as more than a couple of old dudes that are yammering over metaphorical coffee, sort of reminiscing about things, and rather, perhaps today's discussion is an invitation for you to do what a company called AIG did in an ad they ran years ago that always impressed me, where they had a theme that said, the greatest risk in life is not taking one. So take the risk on you. Take the risk on who you could be. Do not end up being George Colleen at the end of your life, wondering if it mattered you lived and whether you blew it. Take the risk, and the way you do it is through entrepreneurship. In your marriage, in your relationship, in your friendships, in your job, in your health, in your spirit walk, take the chance to be creative, be ambitious, be driven, and be willing to learn. And the only thing you will sacrifice is your fear and the small prison that we put ourselves in. Because ironically, we die slow, quiet deaths through the mediocrity of not taking a chance. And once again, Brother Stacey, I want to honor you because you're such a great example. It's harder to do actually as you get older, and here it is that you've done it. And so you are experiencing success today with Hourglass quickly, and you're going to experience more of it because people now are taking the Stacey they knew, and they're seeing this new Stacey that's finally decided to take off the damn tie, loosen his collar, and kind of come down to earth and say, okay, let me share with you what I've learned in all these years and this program that I now have gone through and that I realize has a lot of value. For anybody watching this, let us help you. Now, that doesn't mean pay us something. It may mean that. It may mean we engage in something formally, but Stacey is available. I'm available. If you have something going on or you just need to have a conversation, reach out to us. And let's see if we can provide you some support and some perspectives on how you can trust you more than perhaps you ever thought you could. Stacey, final words?
Beautiful. Folks, if you don't take anything away from this 35 minutes or whatever it's been, just listen to the last 2 minutes that Al just gave you. It can change your life. You'll be so glad you did. We appreciate you watching. Can't wait till we're together again. Al, thanks so much, brother.
Thanks, brother. Bye-bye now.
All right, take care.
You bet.